Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Terribly Honest with David Tenson. It's quite a blustery day, and I hope the audio here isn't too bad with the wind. If it's terrible, you won't even hear this. But please do forgive it. A few of the little windy parts of this. Um, I'm also going back to my old mic just because of the wind stuff as well. So, thanks for those who responded to the last podcast, and it's I I love it. I love this call and response thing. So if you listen and you have questions, and send them through, I'll be happy to consider them and to answer them. It gives me a sense that this is conversational and helpful and meaningful. So I got some really good responses. Interestingly, I talked about the small business model, the small business novel at the end of the last podcast, and some new listeners, because this gets fed by Spotify onto YouTube. I don't know how these people found it, but yeah, they obviously tuned into that part about the novel writing, and some of them mentioned, yeah, there's nothing around the small business novel. So that was just really interesting. But I know quite a few people were really interested in the whole writing process and what that meant. And then some people also commented on what it was like to work in small business and as an employee, which is so true. There is some of the salience around working for small businesses compared to larger organizations is that quite a number of people who start a small business and that grows to staff and employment usually are not prepared enough, or just tend to forget that this employee is not a stakeholder or a shareholder in this organization. You, as a small business owner, want them to be passionate about the product or service that you sell, to be professional, and to maybe even give as much as you do to this organization. And it's not very common that you'll find an employee in a small business, particularly as you're starting out. After a few years, small business owners can get a little bit, tired or a bit more carefree, but particularly in the early days, it'll be very rare you're going to find an employee that cares more about the business than you, because they don't have as much skin in the game. They're pulling a salary, and if the business does good, sure, there might be some sales bonuses, or you've made promises that we can all get a slice of this pie. I've had that pitched to me before. If we come on board, David, and this does really well, you'll do really well. And that's a great kind of sales pitch of an owner to try and get you on board. But at the end of the day, if this thing is worth a lot of money and this business is doing really well, the person who has risked the most, which is usually the owner, and has more skin in the game and is the biggest risk taker, is and should take more home. So because of this dynamic, and because most employees, are going to get a wind of this, they're going to still want their 4 weeks holiday. They still want to have workers' compensation. They don't want to work an extra 2 hours, 3 hours a day, or 10 hours a week to make this business thrive. That's something the owner wants. So working in those environments can sometimes be chaotic and frustrating. And it's not just about coming from larger organizations or larger institutions. It's also about the shareholders, the stakeholders, the skin in the game, and the fact that the small business owner is the founder. They always have the most to lose, but always have the most to gain. Sadly, statistically, we know that 70% of small business owners would make more as they'd make more as employees for another company as they would as owners of their own business. And so this is a reality. Morning. Morning. Here you go. And by the way, if you're listening, I record this on my morning walk. We have a lovely neighborhood. We say good morning to each other, so that's the interruptions. And I don't like to edit them out because I think they're lovely. 70% of businesses, small business owners, don't make as much. So it's also not uncommon that somebody who's a small business owner might be paying the staff more than they pay themselves for a while. Of course, that leaves 30% that do well. And I've worked in those businesses. And sometimes it is hard to know that, you know, you're working and flogging yourself. You're working really hard in this organization. You're meeting expectations. You're doing the hours. And the owner's doing as much and maybe even less hours than you. And they're living in they're taking home a lot more, driving the nicer cars. They're leaving their toys and their, you know, expensive items around. That can be a real challenge within organizations as well. All that said, some people love working for others who are doing really, really well because it inspires them to do really well themselves. So it's a very mixed bag when it comes to small to medium-sized business, depending on, again, what part of the world you're listening from. A small business in Australia has less than 20 employees full-time. All that to say, I hear your comments. Working in a small business is a challenge, and I'd love to integrate some of those dynamics into the novel if I go ahead and write it, which I think I will slowly. I've got to get this next book out of the way, the one that we're in the middle of, which I'm going through editing stage, and a PhD thesis, amongst other things. But that is a good segue to some of the next questions that I was asked, and they're around writing. So an old friend from WA, I used to travel there for ministry and stuff, and she wrote some great questions. So thank you. I'm keeping everybody anonymous, but thank you for asking those questions. They're a great prompt. And one of her questions was, well, she asked a few. So she said, on the topic of writing, where did you come to a place where you were comfortable that you could speak on a particular topic? Was it your own internal desire to squeeze out what was inside you? Or were particular topics of so much interest that you wanted to delve deeper and share your findings? Additionally, how did you decide what to write about? She says, I would love to write a non-fiction book one day, but I have so much that I want to write about that it's difficult to decide on where to start. And there's some great questions there. So how did I become comfortable? How do I get to a place where I'm comfortable to talk about a particular topic? Okay, so for me, the first book I wrote, which was translated into Mandarin, it's only in Mandarin, I was asked to write that book on parenting, and it's called Big Hearted Fathers in English. Don't ask me how that's translated to Mandarin. I was sort of commissioned to write that, and I wrote that. It did take me a while. This is the first book I wrote, first sort of major piece I'd written, and like lengthy piece. And so I wrote that because I was asked to. I was at the time traveling and ministering as a traveling preacher, teacher, healer in that capacity, and somebody who had connections in China ask me to write this particular book with that theme, but have that hidden throughout it, but really talk about parenting and draw out some of the stuff that I spoke about on this topic of blessing. So the next book, the book that I'm currently editing through, is on how to pray a blessing, which is that very same teaching, and so that is kind of integrated into this book. It's also semi-memoir. It was printed in color. So again, I hope the wind is okay right now. It's pretty windy where I am. So that particular book was my first, and the topic was written because I was sort of passionate about it, and in some ways I was ignorant about the plethora of parenting books around, but I was assured by the contacts that I had who were bringing it into the Chinese market and found a proper publisher and everything, that this was not a topic that was written about very often in China from this angle of creating a loving, safe, and generous home for your children. And those sort of things don't exist in a lot of books in China, and so I was assured that there was a gap in the market there, and in some ways some of my ignorance was a good motivation. And so that was the first one. So the topic, to answer that question, the topic was something I was very comfortable with already. The next few books, of course, were my poetry collections, and poetry is a very different kind of which I'll talk about in a second, a different approach to writing, and they were very memoir based. And I think, as I mentioned last time, I don't know if I did, but yeah, I think I did, that poetry you can write, you can build up your own personal collection over years and then put them together, and they don't have to have a theme, and there's no main characters, and there's no main plot, and there's no main idea that you're trying to communicate across a whole book. So the gift of poetry is you can, write through events and experiences in your life. And again, the prompts or musings in poetry are vast. And for me, if you've read The Wrestle and read others, I tend to draw from my inner life and experience. One of the challenges with that is, this might sound a bit morose or funny, but poets and others will understand this, maybe songwriters too. Poetry is easier to write in the valleys or the dips or the disappointments in life, or it's easier to write in the dark than it is in the light or the hilltops or the good times, because it is usually a language and a gift, particularly if it's emotionally stirred poetry. It's one of those, it's kind of like songwriting, like some of the best songs ever written, are about heartbreak and breakups. And so it's a little bit the same as that, it's a little bit the same as having that. So if I'm not in that space, I'm not going to be writing like that. The next, I had there's that little kids book that I wrote. I saw a gap in the market for kids who didn't want to wear a costume at Book Week at school here in Australia. And so the kid without a costume is their get out of jail free card. And I had kids who throughout their primary school years were like, I hate uniforms, I hate costumes, not uniforms, I hate costumes, I'd rather wear my school uniform, I don't want to dress up as someone, I love books, but I just don't want to draw attention to myself. I just want to go as myself and not participate, but I don't want people to think I'm dumb or don't like or read books. So for me, that was a gap in the market, and I had that sort of brewing away for about a year, and then, to be honest, one weekend I was like, embarrassingly, they're all AI images, but it serves a purpose, and that was a bit of kind of fun. So even though I'm on my 8th book, the kids book, it's not my greatest achievement. but it's there, and it has helped a good number of kids who have been like, you know, either they have, uh, they're neurospicy, or there's just this deep preference to not get dressed up. And this book gives them a great out. The next, but then of course, Descent to Everything. I wrote kind of in discovery as well. That's the topic of eldering. I began to see the gap um, in the market there. I began to like, and I'll talk about what I mean by the gap in the market. I began to, but personally, really feel this pull into this next stage of life, post-parenting. By the way, my child's moved out now, so that happened last weekend. House feels very different. Could write a poem about that one day. So this post-parenting season of life is definitely on us. What does that look like? If I've been intentional in my parenting, how do I become intentional about my post-parenting growth and maturity and posture towards life and others, God and faith and work and my children and possibly grandchildren and wider community? How do I continue to descend after midlife and in and through midlife to make room for everybody else to come through? How do I move away from center stage syndrome? How do I decenter everything in my life so that there is space and room for others to be their best selves? How do I become a blesser and an instigator and a listener and a companion for others during this season of their lives while I enter into the season of my life? And so in a way, Descent to Everything, I really knew what I wanted to talk about. There were a few authors who'd written stuff on this, but gee, I hope you can hear through this wind. It's huge. There are a few authors that had written about this, but not in the way that I had, and not including some of the God things as well. And I also wanted to reference those. And my next book on the blessing has not been, it's stuff I know. So it's How to Pray a Blessing is really what we spoke about and practiced for many years, Nat and I, as we traveled and as we practiced at home, and realized it was really time to put this into a book and to share it with other people so that they could benefit from this practice of blessing and creating a culture of blessing in the homes and churches and groups and schools and so on. So that's really why. They're all the whys behind that, and that's a bit of an insight into the topics of this. But it's important, if you are thinking of writing, that you understand the kind of writer or the kind of writing that takes place. So when it comes to writing, whether it's a novel or a non-fiction book or something like that, there are sort of different approaches to writing. There are 10. So I'm going to scoot through these. I've got a list here on my phone. And you might recognize yourself in some of these. Some people are discovery writers, okay? And this is kind of like go by the seat of your pants, or like some people call it pantsing. You've picked a topic and you're going to discover it along the way, or you've got a novel and you've got some characters and a rough idea, and you are going to see where those characters take you in the story and the scene. There's no detailed plan up front. Everything emerges as you write or through the writing itself. So there's not a great sense of you knowing where you're going, but you have this strong sense of voice. It can feel messy or meandering, and it may take a bit long, and if it's not done right, it can feel that way. It can feel as if it may not end on a point, or the story may not close off. All that said, some people write in a way like that. They will write essays or memoirs or reflective writing, and it can be really, really good, and they can lean more on either a deep character in a novel and you fall in love and you don't care what this character does. You just love them. You just are like, oh, this person's awesome. And or you've got a topic and you move through it. So there are essays that are put together like this, and that's the discovery writing process. In a way, Descent to Everything started as a discovery. As I began to write for months and just journal and go through iterations of what I was looking for, the concept or theme, the theory of decentering came to mind, came to my purview. I saw that through some research. I love this idea of God being decentered. So there are some real unique topics in the book, and so that was not as planned out all the way. But after a while, I realized these are 5 areas we can decenter and go on. So that's discovery writing. Second one is really to plan and outline something, or plotting. So in this case, you think and then you write. So you really are thinking through something, and then you get into the writing. Here's my introduction, here's the first chapter, etc. And so in these cases, people will have a clear structure. They'll have outlines. If they're a novel, there will be a rhythm to it. There'll be a character plan. It's more efficient and controlled. You can write a lot quicker because you know where you're going here, but then it can feel stiff and overplanned. I listened to a great interview with Dean Koontz, who's like written 120 novels, and he's one of the wealthiest fiction writers out there. And he it seems, does a hybrid between these. He doesn't always rely on plot, but really can build amazing, lovable or hated protagonists or antagonists in their stories. So planning and plotting, it works for some, doesn't work for others. There's a hybrid others will use, but plotting or planning is good for academic writing, business books, teaching material. So for Descent to Everything, I kind of had all the chapters roughly planned out, key questions I was answering, key things I was going to cover. But because I already knew most of the material, the secret sauce is putting them all in the book. Yep. The next one is kind of this hybrid, as I just alluded to. Some people call this a plantser, so it's the difference between pantsing and plotting. And so it has some planning, but then a lot of discovery. So you might start that book with some a really key question that you'd like to answer, that you'd like to discover. And all along that journey, you're bringing people with you. In a way, Descent to Everything became a bit like this too. There was a loose outline, but I was flexible in the execution of that. You can adjust insights as they emerge. It's like if you're an experienced writer and comfortable in your writing, this works a bit better. You can kind of rely on some other, devices to help you through this and to keep the book sticky. Keep people glued to it, and create enough variation that, because the truth is sometimes the premise of a book is so simple, and then people spend 40,000 words saying the same thing again and again. And I think that's a tragedy. I think some of these writers should have allowed themselves to explore things a little bit more in the space, or expand on topics surrounding their main theme. This just happens, and if it's your first book, then that's okay. That's an awesome start. God bless you. I mean, you've started something. So anyway, this hybrid thing is good for experienced people. It's good for long form nonfiction, research-based storytelling, narrative theology, for example, is in this place. Okay, number 4 is research-led writing. So this is what I'm doing with my PhD, right? So like the first year of a PhD in this research-led writing, you're just reading everything around your topic that you can, or everything that is adjacent to it, because you might find a gap and you can't actually, no one has, the thing with a PhD, for example, or other academic writing is you have to come up with something that's novel, something that's unique, something that others may not have looked at or done before exactly the way you're going to do it, but you are going to you still need to write about those things. So like, well, I'm exploring 2 aspects to small business education in my PhD, and some people have done one of those aspects in different countries, but no one has done them in context of a micro-credentialed course being delivered by a university in Australia. And no one has done it considering measuring its impact in the way that I am. So I still have to find all those elements, read and write. So that's very research-led. It's good for journal articles, policy papers, evidence-based books. And if you read Descent to Everything, that some of that research-led writing is sort of filtered throughout the book too, partly because I wanted to give it credibility. My next book on the blessing, I don't have much academic referencing. That doesn't have a lot in her sections. We do reference other book, what we call grey literature, but we're not, there's no reference list with research-based things, and because it doesn't need it. That book is not convincing people. It's a practical, how-to explanatory book with some great stories and encouragement, tools and resources. So it's a bit different, but that's research-led writing. The next one is argument-driven writing, and this is where you start with a claim and you build towards it. So this is good for essays, opinion pieces, theology, leadership writing. Is you kind of start with making an argument, and each section sort of serves that argument. This sort of writing is clear, it's persuasive. You want this thing to really work for you. Again, in Descent to Everything, I use some of these devices as well. And as you can see, as I've gone through these lists, you dip your toe in a few of these things. You can mix these up a little bit, but this whole idea of having an argument, you'll see that is just a really major theme in some books. You see this in the health industry a lot. So you will see people say, this person says that, I don't know, protein is good for you, and here's 200 pages to convince you or argue that you don't need as much as you think you need, for example. Those things can be great hooks for marketing too. The protein less diet or whatever it is. I'm just picking something that is, everyone talk about protein now in health. All right, moving through expressive and free writing. All right, this is where you write without judgment or structure. This is kind of like when you're warming up, you're breaking blocks. Again, it's another kind of writing. You wouldn't necessarily publish this kind of writing as you would some of the previous things, but this is where you just sit down, pen and paper or a typewriter or a computer or whatever it is you use, and you just are free writing, expressive writing, I will do this in points sometimes, and it could lead to a poem that I end up publishing. I'm just writing to myself. I'm just writing things that I'm feeling or thinking, and things will pop out as well. So again, it's a valid kind of writing. Maybe not something you necessarily publish, but can definitely lead to published things, as previously mentioned. Um, so that last one and these few here are not necessarily, um, and you could end up in something published, but there's still kinds of writing. And maybe I take a little pause here and explain that I love writing. I've been writing for years. I will write whether I publish that writing or not. I just happen to be in a season of life, a job where, in vocation, particularly in academia, and then some of my side gigs where I like writing. It's something I would prefer to do than other things. Okay, I'll go to the gym with my son. I'll play pickleball occasionally, but if I have, and I'll watch some TV shows if they're worth it. But I like to write. Like, I will forego other things so I can write whatever it is I'm like wanting to write. I just that is a huge motivation for me in this season of life, and has been. I think even when we lived in Japan some 20 years ago, I started blogging. So I've been blogging and writing for a few decades. Um, that's part of my motivation to write and publish books, is because I want to, actually. Not because the world has to have it, but because I really enjoy writing, the challenge of it, which is why, having covered a few genres now, poetry, nonfiction, explanatory, how-to books, I'd like to maybe tackle a novel. I'm doing a PhD that's 80,000 words, another kind of style. But it's kind of like running. If you like running, you can run in the park, you can do short distance, long distance, sprinting. You might want to go to South Africa and do the comrades. There's something that in you that just wants to explore what running would look like. And that's the same for me in writing. Okay, back to the list. Number 7, iterative writing. It is sometimes really good when you, as you write, and this is handy, it doesn't matter what style you write in, particularly if it's going to head towards publishing, is number 7 is iterative writing. So you're going to expect to rewrite these things many times. Okay. One of the bonuses of iterative writing is that you have in your mind, this is a rough first draft. This is why when Nat and I went on my little writing retreat, I could punch out 10,000 words in the day and a half that we were away. Because this was rough. I knew I was going back over this, but I was in the flow, and I know I'm going to rewrite and then rewrite again and possibly revisit things 2, 3, 4 times. If you write a 40,000 word book, you have, like, if that's what it is, once you publish that thing, it's 180 pages on. You'll probably have written not just 40,000, but 120, 150,000, because you go over it again and again. And that's part of the reiterative writing process. You write, you draft, you redraft, and this is, I know authors who hate the first process, as in, like, they get it out of the way as quick as they can, and they love the rewriting, they love the redrafting, because this is where some of their passion and love for the language gets to come out, and they get to say what they mean again and again and refine it. And really good books are refined a good number of times. Again, if you listen to the How I Write podcast, you'll see how different it is for writers, their different approach to this. Some people will write the entire book in draft and then go over the entire book. Some people will be like, again, Dean Koontz was one of the last I listened to, but in his novels, he said, I'll write the first chapter and then I will read it and write it again fresh. And then I will go through and do all my line editing. He says, I do not move to the second chapter until the first chapter is near perfect. For him, in his eyes, he said, it'll go to the editors and they'll have things to say. But he says, I don't move on to the second chapter until the first one's perfect, because that sets a tone for the rest of the book. That's his approach, and you've got to find your own rewriting approach. Some of my poems, poetry can be a bit different. I know poets that will sit on poems for years and never feel that they're perfect. I didn't suffer from that. But part of that is my personality and style as well. Collaborative writing is another one. Number 8, collaborative writing. This is where meaning's co-created. This is where multiple voice. This is where you might have multiple authors or a few people co-author a book. So in Nat and I's next book, the way that we're working together is she will really have her own section of the book, and that will weave into everything else I've written about that. And that's how that's the best way that we can work, because we talk and think differently, and I will be editing that, but I also want her voice to be maintained in her sections of the book. So you can go and learn about writer's voice, but that is really something that is going to work for us. That's what we agree would be best not just for the readers, but best for our marriage as well, because she doesn't need me telling her how and what she should be writing. So collaborative stuff can look very different, can have different portions. Some person might do 80% of it, the other person does 20%. I know Natalie co-authored a couple of books with someone else, and she contributed particular prayers and read through the draft, created some comments, but the other person really did 90% of the work, but her name was still on the book. And that happens in a lot of areas within writing. That's not uncommon. So collaborative writing is good for co-authored. It's really common in research, multiple authors on papers. I've got another paper coming out soon that I've got another 2 co-authors, but I did most of the work, and so my name's first on those papers. It's good for community statements, organizational documents, anything that is collaborative and you want to include many voices. I don't know about multiple authors on a novel. I think that could be a real challenge, but I'm sure it's been done. The next would be constraint-based. We're getting through these now, if you're still with us. Number 9, constraint-based writing. So this limits the kind of creativity. And this is actually a really good practice to this is where I think is a really good way to start, is to know that you've only got X amount of words to say something really succinctly. This is how really good copywriters get where they are. You give yourself a word limit. You give yourself a particular kind of form, a particular prompts, particular rules, and it forces clarity and intention. So a friend of mine has just finished an essay that she's submitting to a competition. It's 2,100 words, but I know she could write this in 10 or 20,000 words, but it's taken a long time to bring that right down and make it clear and solidify what she wants to say. And good academic writing is like that. And in fact, a lot of good writing is like that. It's a lot of stuff in a smaller number of pages, because you've been clear and concise and clarity, not just in your writing style, because there is a writing style where you remove some of the rhetoric or some of the adverbs and you make it more definitive. But not just in the writing style, but also in the topic itself. So you could still be rhetorical, poetic, and have something that's meaty and has a lot of concepts and says a lot in a few pages. That is kind of some of my preference. Descent to Everything was like that. A lot of my blogs and essays are like that. But that is a great practice. There's a free website, I think it's called Hemingway app. You can just write into that app, into that web page, and it'll find constraints for you. It'll help you say things shorter. This is why X or Twitter was a great thing, is how can I say something really good and pithy in just 144 characters, for example. So constraint kind of writing is good as a practice and might make you far more publishable, because again, going back to something I talked about in a previous podcast about this attention economy, people like for you to get to the point, particularly if you're doing short form writing, blogging, etc. In a book, you might have a few pages to make your point, but the shorter the point, the shorter it is, shorter the form is, the more you have to get to your point and be really concise about that, and that can be really good practice. All right, number 10 is where you speak before you're writing, or oral first writing. So I think I talked about in my last one. Morning. Talked about in my last podcast how I would go on walks and dictate kind of ideas and concepts and parts of books, and then go back and rewrite and clarify and those kind of things too. I know people, and in a way, our new book on blessing was really an oral first, or a sermon or workshop first book, where all the exploration, a lot of the language, the practice, and everything was first spoken and taught and demonstrated, and then it goes into written form. So this kind of has, I guess, two parts to it, and you can have that. Because I know people that will take podcasts, episodes, and summarize them into a book. Tim Ferriss's book, The Tool of the Titans, or Tool of Titans, again, are summaries of his podcast interview. A friend of mine, Jason Clark, has done the same with his Rethinking God with Tacos book. He's summarized a stack of interviews with people that he's interviewed on this podcast. Those are oral first and then refined into books. Some of the bonus of that is too that you get to preserve some of the speech and natural cadence of something as it's spoken, as it's taught, as it's unpacked. This is really good for pastoral writing, something you have to read out, memoirs. It's very different. I think all good writing, a big litmus test is how well does it read out, how clear and easy is it to understand. Good writing in many ways, I think, and I'd agree with others that have said that once you read out what you've written, it should be more concise, more poignant, and better spoken than you might be able to speak it. Because if you transcribed what I've said here within this podcast and just wrote it out as it is verbatim, it's kind of messy. It could be said a lot better on paper, and that's part of the refining process. So anyway, that is a lengthy answer to that really good question about approaches to writing. Those are 10 ways that you could do that. All right. Conveniently, the mic cut out just as I was ending that. We will cut this episode here and come back to some more of these questions in another podcast. Thanks for listening, and feel free to shoot through any questions on writing or any topic that I talk about. It's good to walk with you guys.